Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. This is episode 3, and I am very happy to have Cathy McKnight here with me today. Cathy is the chief problem solver at the Content Advisory, and that's a consulting firm that I like how they say balances the art and science of intelligent content strategy and operations. I think that's a really cool way to say that. She also has the title of VP of Consulting, but that's a little more boring than saying she's a chief problem solver, which,
Indeed.
and that's much more explanatory as well. Cathy, years of experience in content strategy, operations, governance, technology, selection, and implementation. So I'm really happy that you're here today, Cathy, to join us to talk about content operations and share lots of great insights.
Well, thanks for having me, Barb. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, cool. So it's funny, I'd almost forgot that I'd interviewed you back in 2019 for a article for Diginomica. And when I went back and I looked at it, there's a quote in here that I just wanted to read to you. There are so many, this is a quote that you had said, because we recorded, it was actually a podcast that I've turned into an article. There are so many organizations that I work with that are talking about and looking so far forward in their content capabilities that they're missing that first step, which is being able to effectively just manage your content, being able to create, edit, post, take off, sunset, archive, access, revive, all the basic things. They're all caught up in the bright and shiny that we hear from vendors. Still true today, right?
Oh, sadly, yes. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and that has always been one of the challenges in that those who are acquiring the technology and making those decisions are like, I want to do that, some vendor has shown that's, years away ahead of where they are. When, I talk about governance and people instantly start checking their phone, right? It is like the least sexy thing about anything. And it's so critical, and it is a defining and baseline need. If you were to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs from a content ops perspective, governance is it. Governance is the first step.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's still, from a content ops perspective, they have the technology, they have kick-ass teams, but they don't have the structure and the proper content ops around it to make it work as well as it could.
Yeah. So how are you defining content operations then? Because that's what you're talking about, all of that structure.
Yeah. So really, it's anything that impacts the delivery of content, full stop. So of course, people, process, technologies are the trifecta that you hear everybody, talk about. One of the things that I like to add is that, all of that has to be in service to the corporate goals and objectives. You can have the right people, processes, and technologies creating great content, but if it doesn't support directly the corporate objectives and goals, or your business unit objectives and goals, then you don't have a content operations practice, because it's not actually delivering what you are there to deliver, which is content that supports the company. Right. So, it's about having the right pieces, but also making sure that they fit together, right, to drive that content machine.
So the right pieces, what are they? How do you get started? I guess, what are they? How do you get started? I'm sure there's an order, I guess, to how you would do it.
Well, there's no one place to start. One of the challenges many of our clients run into is they get stuck on the where do we start, right? And there's so many different adages that you can say. You want to solve world hunger, pick a street. You want to eat an elephant, take your first bite. Whatever it is, which probably aren't two good analogies to put back to back. Sorry, I didn't think of that. In any case, it's you got to start somewhere. So right. There's no one right place to start. One of the things that we like to do is, when we go into a client, is very much make sure that they're addressing the right problem. So we'll get brought in, and it'll be a general, we need help with our content strategy. We need help with content operations. We want to do better with content marketing. And so whatever the challenge is, and in this case, we're talking about content ops, it's about really understanding what your current state is. So where do you sit today? What does your technology look like? What do your processes look like? Who are the people that you have? Have you documented things like roles and responsibilities, guidelines? Do you have a governance structure? Um, do you know who to go to for a technology question? Like something as simple as that. Until you have a start of the pieces to get like identifying where things are, you can't move forward. So we always like to say, absolutely get your current state. Take a step back, assess, validate what the real problem is. Often, it's kind of like job titles. We'll speak to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, I'm the senior vice president of content," and they do nothing like that. Content is in their job, but they do so many other things. So, often they say one thing when really it's something else. So, really dig in and talk to stakeholders, talk to leadership, talk to your partners, talk to your vendors, talk to your agencies, and get that inside out, outside in view of what the problem is. Try and get the macro of what's happening today so you can start moving forward, because any strategy you set is really a micro focus, but you got to know where you're starting.
Right. Does it take a long time to kind of get that focus? I guess maybe that depends, because the size of your company, the size of the content that you're doing and producing.
The challenge today, Barb, with everybody's doing 47 jobs. They were
Yeah.
hired to do 3, and nobody's doing just 3 things. So it's about making time for it. It's prioritizing, which is often why we get hired. We work with really, really smart people. The organizations we work with are brilliant. They're Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies. They didn't get there because they don't know what they're doing. But they're stretched so thin, and often it's a lot easier, it's time effective, and it's actually cost effective to bring an outside resource in to come in and expedite rather the process, because we can go in, we'll speak with, we'll do 10, 15 interviews that, encompass, anywhere between 15 and 30 people, and really get that big picture point of view that isn't tainted by the internal bias, right?
Yeah.
So we're going in and we actually see what happens. So it doesn't have to take long, whether you hire someone, whether you do it yourself. It's just making sure that it's somebody's responsibility and they're going to get measured against it.
Yeah. So is that where a content ops framework comes in then? Like that you have to set something like that up to figure out how everything's going to lay out and work together?
That's exactly the thing, is getting in and understanding current state, right? So that's not just what you have, but that's maturity as well.
Okay.
What do your systems look like? What do your processes look like? How well are they working? Do you have them documented? Are anybody following them? Has the exception become the rule? Right? I'm working with a client right
How
now.
often does that happen? That's a good question.
Oh my gosh. So I'm working with a client right now who have a core set of documented workflows. But after some investigation, and I didn't look at all of them, but of the, let's say, 20 that I looked at, I would say there was an exception and a workaround to about 12 of them. So nobody was actually following the path, and they were still calling it a workaround. I'm like, well, you guys have been doing this for 2 years this way. It's no longer a workaround. This is the way you're doing it. So update your documentation to reflect that. So the next person come in doesn't try and do it the old way, because it doesn't work, because there's a technology gap, which is why they did the workaround.
Right.
So, it's this circle of life thing about what is it, documenting it, fixing it, make sure you document it, train, and you just have to keep going around. And it can be tedious and it can be monotonous, but if you keep up on things like that, it makes things run so much smoother. So, back to your question about the framework, it's understanding current state of all of those things: people, process, technology, how they're tying back, what are the processes, but not only what they are, but the maturity level. There are going to be some things inevitably we see in organizations where they are just nailing it. Like they're hitting it way outside of the park as far as efficiency. They're doing it really well. It's a well-oiled machine. And that's usually, that can be because a team has been working together for a long time and they've just got that groove kind of thing. It could be because a technology was really well implemented. And when I say implemented, it was implemented and deployed. So it went in with the right, because it was implemented based on actual needs and stakeholder, what they were looking to deliver. It wasn't broken. So whoever implemented said, hey, you know what? We can do what you're asking, but it's going to bend to the point of breaking the system, or we can meet you 80% of the way and it's going to stay on track. Great, stay there. They've trained, they've got that documented, and they're using it consistently, right? And then there's going to be other places. It's like, how are you getting anything published with the way you're doing stuff, right? So it's impossible. Once you've got that, it's about getting leadership support. Here's what we found. Here's what we need. Here's what we want to do. Will you support us? And when it's support, I'm not just talking about funding. It is very easy to write that virtual check in comparison to having somebody's back, in comparison to when change happens. And, I have been known to say, change, yay, said no one ever. People are going to complain, and they're not going to complain to you, the person who's training or conveying the change. They're going to go to their boss, and then their boss is going to go to their boss, and then that's going to get back to your boss or whoever owns the process. And they need to be able to turn around and say, listen, I hear you. Change is uncomfortable. Nobody wants this. It hurts for a little while, but the long-term vision, this is going to be better. And I really need you to cascade down to your team that this is the new way of doing things, that they need to take the training. They need to move forward and accept that it's not the same old anymore. And that is often a step that is overlooked. There's an assumed support because they have the funding, because they've been given the head count, etc. But unless they have somebody at that top echelon who's going to have their back, it can all fall apart really, really quickly.
Would you not assume, or maybe that's wrong, that if they were bringing someone in like you, that there is that executive support? Or do you still sometimes in a situation where you have to go convince the executive that this is what needs to happen?
Yeah, like I said, it's pretty easy. You hear as a leader, somebody comes to you and says, hey, Barb, here's the current situation. We want to be able to do this in the future. We want, this is going to give us better ROI on our content efforts. It's going to create us a more effective and efficient team. We're going to be able to do things faster, better, stronger, get to market sooner. We'd like to hire the content advisory to come in and help us do this right. Great. Sign off on the PO, right? It's all done. Okay, here's the report from TCA. Here's what they want us to do. Here's the changes. Here's how long it's going to take. Here's the impact on the business. Oh, actually, you know what? We have this, and this going on. This might be a little too disruptive. It might, counter this or whatever. And, so it's one thing to get the work started. It's another one to actually have it executed. And I can tell you, unfortunately, that there are times where we go in, we work with amazing teams who are vested. They want this to happen. And when we check in with them a year later, they haven't made a lot of progress because there is so much competition for things that need to get done.
Yeah. Challenges all around.
Indeed. So yeah, when we do get an opportunity to sit down, and one of the things that we do as part of our engagements, whenever we can have it happen, obviously we don't have the right ability to a leader's calendar, but when we can get that executive presentation, when we can walk them through what we heard, what we found, and how our recommendations and how it's going to impact the business, very rarely is there, that barrier is removed pretty quickly. Right.
Okay. Let's talk about where content operations can sit in the organization, because obviously there's different ways that places that it can sit. Like what are they, and are there ways to consider what is the best way for your company?
So we have seen content ops literally sit just about everywhere, even HR, if you can believe it. We had one, really. And anybody listening who knows like even a little bit about content ops is going, really, HR? Yeah, they had the marketing function reporting up through HR. It was, wow. I'd never seen it ever again. Like that was the one and only time. So not typically HR, let's say. It can sit just about anywhere, but it really depends on the structure of the content ops. So there are three sort of standard functions or structures for content operations or content practice. You have centralized, decentralized, and a hybrid or federated model. So there's no right way of doing things. Every organization is different. I would say out of all of the three, what's the common denominator? Again, repeat on repeat is governance. Because you have to have the governance to enable the process and let people know how the content operations are meant to work, and to make sure that the 6 functions of content operations, which are strategy, creation, promotion, merchandising, activation, and measurement, are connected and being executed consistently. And consistently there is the key. It can be simple to start, and you move forward from there, right? It's that continuous improvement. So centralized model. That's something like a center of excellence, or COE, where you have an internal agency type structure within the organization that is the go-to for all things content. So regardless of what you need of those 6 functions, they're the person or the team to go to. There's a high degree of control, so everything is on point and on brand. This is consistent. You don't have to worry about the blue being the wrong Pantone. You don't have to worry about the wrong font. The tone is consistent. You know the audience and everything. There's a high degree of control on everything. Challenge here is that it's difficult to scale, obviously. If you're working in a really large organization, having a small group can be really, really difficult. Because things get backed up. You can plan all you want from a resource management perspective, but we counsel most content teams to target to be sort of a 70-30 or 60-40 proactive versus reactive content function. So 60 to 70% of your day should be spent on things are there. You know what's coming. You've got a content calendar. There's content briefs. There's a process, etc. You know what has to be done. And you have to give yourself literally 30 to 40% of your day for all the stuff you didn't see coming. All of the things, the CEO saying, yeah, I just accepted to do a presentation keynote tomorrow and I need a brand new deck tomorrow. Yeah. What are you going to say, right? There's no, you can't say no. Right? There's the newsjacking element. Something goes down in your industry or government that impacts. So you've got to be able to turn around and react to that. There's also, that gives you a little bit of time for innovation, right? Making sure you're staying up on what's new, whether it's from a process perspective, whether it's from a technology, whether it's within your industry and your area of focus. So that's 60, 40, 70, 30 is the split that we go to. That's really, really hard in a centralized environment because you just have everything being thrown at you. It's a feast or famine often. But like I said, it comes out beautifully. And one of the key benefits of this is there's a visibility into all content that's happening because every content request comes through one team.
Right.
Works really well in small orgs, as you can imagine. If there's not a big demand, then having that team is great. Larger orgs, it's a bit more dodgy. It can work well when you have different COEs for different functions, right? So the 6 that I mentioned, if you have 2 or 3 centers of excellence that focus on a couple of those with a little bit of crossover, there's a bit better of balance. But it can be done. You look at, for large organizations, Cleveland Clinic is an excellent example of this. They started off with a really small team and a small part of the content function, and it has just grown exponentially from there. Their team is massive now. And if you go to their site, there is nothing off brand. The tone is the same. It's consistent. They're on point. They're able to have those difficult conversations. They're timely. The Content Marketing Institute, if you want to go and read case studies, there's a bunch of them. They've been award winners multiple times, but really, really good example of that. But like I said, it's hard and it's expensive. It's really hard to scale that up and to keep it manageable. As you can imagine, the flip side to that is a decentralized model where, the 6 functions of content are scattered in varying degrees of success and capability across the organization. So each of the GOs or the BUs or the departments, depending on how the organization is structured, is doing content themselves. So they're executing their start to finish. They are agile. This is a get shit done kind of approach, right? They need something done and it's heads down and you do it. It could be one person doing it start to finish. It could be a team of 6. It all depends on the size of the business units or function in question. Really agile. What gets lost here is that it can be very much a disparity in riches. So you'll have one team who just happens to have or have hired for specifically strength and content. So they know process, they understand governance, they understand technology, they've got, creativity, etc. Or they have a budget where they can bring in external resources to supplement. So they're creating all this gorgeous, beautiful stuff. And then you have the cobbler kids who are walking around barefoot, right? It's sticky tack and tape to pull something together. They're reusing stuff because they just either don't have the capability or the bandwidth to create new stuff. And there's a real discrepancy in how it can look. So it can reflect very poorly on the brand because you do have disparity. And one of the things that we often remind our clients is that as much as we work hard to understand and to plot out these beautiful and cohesive journeys, we can't dictate where our customers are going. They're going to click into our site or into a piece of content or into a third party. And where they go from there is totally up to them. We can try and influence it. We can give them all the cues and the links and the upsell and the cross sell. But where they go is completely up to them. Mm-hmm. So they might go from an area of riches to an area of poverty in terms of content capabilities. And that's a reflection on the entire brand. So doesn't work well. Where it does work really well is when there are standards that are enforced and followed. So we had a client who the central marketing team, so at the very top level of the brand, at the parentship, they set the strategy and the key messages, and then they send it out to their GOs and the business units and say, here you go. So you have to align with this. But they give them the guidelines, they give them the best practices, they give them the templates to use. How they execute against that is totally up to them in market. So depending on the line of product that they're promoting, depending on the geography from a language perspective, whether it needs translation or transcreation, etc., they leave it to them. You know your market, you know your audience, you do as you need to. They make it work. It works well. Could it be better? Of course. But there's one of the instances where it does work well. Where we see it work the best, obviously, and nobody's going to be surprised by this, is a federated model, right? Where specific responsibilities are chartered out, and there is a centralized team who has capability and capacity in all six. So they are the center of the universe as far as standards go. They're making sure that guidelines are met, that there's training available, that the technology that is being used is kept up to date, that it's linked, that direction is being fed from a metrics perspective, so performance, that there's access to the content components as well as the finalized content assets for reuse, etc. So they're coordinating everything. But what they're saying is, if you have the budget, if you have the team to do content yourself, go off and do it. But we're going to make sure you're doing it right. So there is a clear hand. Unlike in the example that I talked about in the decentralized model, they very much say, here are the guidelines, here's the strategy, here are the key messages, go do it. They're not keeping too close an eye on what's being done. They're certainly not bringing back any of the resources or anything that are completed. Whereas here, it is a closed loop. So yes, you go and do your thing, but now your content that you've created sits in a central repository where we're going to measure it. We're going to see where it's being used, what the activation is from across different parts of the business. We're going to reuse it if we think we need to, or we're going to let somebody else do it. And the other thing is, in the example of Salesforce is an example of this, and they do it brilliantly. Jessica Bergman is just amazing at this. She has completely turned around that practice. Is nobody at Salesforce is allowed to press the big red publish button until they've gone through training. So you could have come from New York Times and been a Pulitzer Prize winning content writer, unless you go through Salesforce training and Jessica's team says, yes, you can do this, you're not publishing anything. So they're really making sure from a guidelines, governance, and standards that all of that is being adhered to. And this can be really difficult to manage, but communication and visibility are essential. And I mean, really, those two things across any of those models are the common denominators of success. If people have a line of sight into what content is being created, what's available, so what's been done in the past and how it's performed, and that there's training and communication on how to do things, it is amazing what these companies can produce.
Yeah, I can just imagine. I read the Cleveland Clinic use case in the new content marketing book by Joe Pulizzi and Brian Piper, and I was just like, wow, I didn't realize, because I always heard them talk about Cleveland Clinic, but I'd never actually read the full story or heard the full story before, and I was just amazed at what they've been able to do there.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
it
crazy.
really is. It's anybody in content, that is a case study to examine. We use them as a best practice example across industries. There's certain things within industries that are very specific, and some industries are way ahead of others as far as process and content capabilities and what they're producing and how they're performing. But the Cleveland Clinic, I mean, if there is a beacon to be looked at from anywhere, they're absolutely one of them, because they went from nothing to that to where they are today.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about well, there's people, process, and there's technology, and we don't have to go like crazy deep on all of them. But from the people perspective, I was just curious: is there someone who needs to own the content operations strategy, to own content operations from like telling you how it's going to work? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. And correct me if I'm misinterpreting here, but from a people perspective, from a content strategy, the important thing is to have a strategy. It is amazing the number of organizations that we go into that don't really have an articulated content strategy. So
Yeah.
people they're creating content against a brand promise. They're creating content based on the product or service that they offer, but what they're not following is a strategy. So what's not been articulated are, here are our core audiences. Here are the primary journeys where we want to target those audiences, right? Because different audiences are going to play different parts of the journey are going to be more important to different audiences. Here's how we're going to reach them. So here are the primary channels. Without understanding some of those core things, it's very hard to execute successfully. You're going to get it right some of the time, because you always do, right? It's just the law of averages. But if you have a strategy against which to build your execution plan, it's just so much more informed. It's quite funny to see the number of customers that we speak with where they're still not using the customer as their starting point for content, right? Where they're still, it's still an asset-based driven approach. So that's where strategy comes in, is it takes it away from, I want to do a webinar, or I want a white paper, or I want to do a campaign on this.
Yeah.
And it flips the conversation to, I want to reach this audience because they need to know or want to know this, or because we want to tell them this. Where are they? How do they most likely consume that information? What kind of information do we need to get? Which channels are we going to push this through? Then what assets are we going to create in order to meet all of those needs? Assets should be the very last thing that come to mind. And it's usually the first thing that comes to mind. So coming back to people, we'll talk about, I guess, more about that from a process perspective, but from a people standpoint, you need somebody who will own the strategy and drive the conversations from an audience-centric perspective. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's one person. It could be a couple people, depending on how the organization is structured. But the other thing is understanding what that strategy is. What are the roles and responsibilities, not the bodies, but the roles and responsibilities that you need to fill that. Right. And that, again, the roles and responsibilities are going to be pretty consistent from company to company, across industry to industry. What's going to look different is how those roles and responsibilities are assigned. That's where you get into the jobs, right? Those are two very different things. When we talk about roles and responsibilities, people start going, well, we have a content ops manager, we have a content marketer, we have a writer. I'm like, no. Forget titles, forget bodies. This is strictly what's the work that needs to get done. And once you've identified the work that needs to get done, then you can assign it to the bodies.
Right.
Because the work doesn't change, it's the bodies and titles that change.
Right. That's interesting, because I think a lot of companies don't work that way.
Oh, no.
Well, yeah. I mean, from personal experience, I can say you go in and they go, yeah, we've got this product we want to sell, and we want you to create a white paper that speaks to why they would want this product. And it's like, okay, but that's not really how you should be doing it, but okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly.
But yet that's the thing. Sometimes you go into these companies and it's like they just know what they want. They know what they're ready to pay for, and they don't want to listen to how you really should do it the right way. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah, and I mean, it's someone in your role as well as ours. We do a lot of writing for organizations, and often the conversation starts with, "We'd like you to write a white paper on X." We
Mhm.
always try and step back. We do it with every engagement. Is like, "Great, we would love to work with you. Let's talk about what you're trying to achieve. Let's talk about the audience you're trying to reach. Let's talk about the message you're trying to bring across or the problem you're trying to solve, etc." And see if the white paper is the right way about going. And sometimes you come up with a lot of different ideas and they're like, "No, we'd like a white paper." And you're like, "Okay, I'll write a white paper." But internally, you have a little more leverage, right? Because it's the person asking for the white paper, usually, if you come back and say, and have those conversations, they'll go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah.
They're not usually fussed about whether it's a white paper, an infographic, or an ebook. They just want something to deliver. But the hard part is because companies and resources get so comfortable and good at creating one or two specific assets, white papers being one of them, they go,
Mhm.
"Sure," because you know what? It's like baking cookies. Once you bake chocolate chip cookies 5 times, you don't need to look at the recipe anymore. You knew exactly what to do, right? You know what you could wiggle room on. If you know what happened. If you play around with like the brown sugar to white sugar ratio, what's going to happen. But it's still a chocolate chip cookie, and
Yeah.
it's still really easy to do, and it's a route activity. It's a heck of a lot more work to actually be audience centric, but the results are hands down like way better than what you're going to get by just doing something because that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah. So is that where process becomes very important, having the right processes in place?
100%. So, from a process perspective, one of the easiest ways to start flipping that conversation around from being reactive to proactive, so where the content team actually gets to be strategic, they actually get to flex the muscles that they have because they are the experts in content. They understand the audience probably better than most people in the organization because they have to. So, having the process that enables them to say, "Great, we would love to work with you. I know you asked for a white paper, but every single piece of content within our organization starts with you filling out this form." And you can
Mhm.
call it a content brief, you can call it a creative brief, you can call it a starting point, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. But the first questions on that form should be, who's your audience? What's the purpose? What's the goal of the content piece, and then timeline, budget, whatever. But those three, audience, goals, and purpose, if they can't articulate that, they're not ready to create a piece of content,
Right.
right? So process starts with that, having that common starting ground, and it is absolutely fascinating. It would be a great psychological study, that having that starting point, how much smoother the rest of it goes when
Hmm.
everybody's starting from the same place and you're following simple steps. It takes away so many of the surprises and so many, "Oh, I didn't think of that," right? So you get all of that stuff out at the beginning, then going forward is just so much smoother. So there's a little bit more friction at the beginning, just at that change point until people are used to doing it, then it's not friction anymore. And
Yeah.
then the rest of it, it's like flowing downhill.
Yeah. Okay. And then, okay, so then technology, lots of different technologies that can help you run this kind of operation well.
So many, and this is a discussion unto itself. I mean,
I
the
know.
the three-letter acronyms out there are, it's just crazy. But technology, one thing to remember, and again, we counsel, and I've spent 20 years of my career in technology in some way, shape, or form, and I've been on the coding side, I've been on the vendor side, I've been on the receiving side, so I get the trifecta. And one thing that companies still don't understand is technology is an enabler. It's not the
Mhm.
solution, right? Getting a new piece of technology is not going to fix what is inherently broken. unless it's that you're missing that piece of technology. Then yes, it fills it in. But then it is all about the implementation and about the deployment and the training and the upkeep and the working it in. So technology, I don't think anymore, I would have used to have said that, a CMS, when we talked about content technology, the CMS was always, content management system was always in the center. It was a hub and spoke model, right? It's not that way anymore. There's so many different pieces that can own the glass. And now that we're talking digital experience platform from a conceptual standpoint, I am not a proponent to say that there is one vendor that offers a DXP. DXP is a consolidation or conglomeration of technologies working together, and it's so unique to each organization as to what makes that up. Yeah. But technology, it can sing or it can sink. It all really depends on making sure that it is implemented to meet certain business needs, so that IT isn't doing it in a vacuum, and that people are trained on it. So often these literally millions of dollars are spent on technology. Somebody comes into work one day and there's an email saying, here is your ID and your password for our new insert technology here. We're going to use it for this. Good luck.
Good luck.
Right? It's like they've run out of time and money to do the actual thing that needs to be done, which is the training. And, there's some core technologies. Content management is still critical, though, it's not the epicenter anymore. It's still absolutely necessary. Digital asset management system. If you want to do content operations well, you need a DAM. You need a central repository for content components, which are the raw pieces before they're put into assets, as well as capturing the finalized assets that are tied into the workflow system and your metrics, so that when somebody's reused a piece. One of the stages that I talked about from a content ops is activation. You don't know every time it's being used, right? So if you're keeping it in a centralized, connected digital asset management system, you're going to track stuff like that. And companies are always surprised at the pieces that are just killing it. Somebody created something, sometimes it's on the fly, sometimes it's a one-off, and it gets picked up and you have no idea, and it's run rampant, right? Which is a good thing and a bad thing, because you don't want it being used so pervasively that it's like, oh my God, there it is again, or incorrectly, or if it was done for someone on a proprietary nature that shouldn't have been used extensively, right? Again, governance comes into play, because you can have a line of sight everybody can have a line of sight into the available components and assets, but they have to have the right permissions to be able to leverage it, and if they can't download it, then it's like, press the connect with me to get access to this asset. Yeah. But making that transparency is so important when it comes to technology.
Yeah. Or if you have a version and then there's an updated version, but no one knows where it's at. And you've got multiple versions out there. It's just crazy. So how would you say that generative AI fits in? Are companies coming to you now saying, what do we do with it? Should we use it? How do we use it? How does it fit in?
Yes, we're hearing more about it. There's still a lot of people are, the sky is falling and I'm going to lose my job kind of thing. But the funny thing is, Barb, is generative AI has been around for ages. I mean, there's a bunch of news outlets who have been using the technology for like 7 years now. Like if you read a weather report or a disaster report, sports summary of a game, like an overview of last night's hockey game, or things where all of the details are provided, that's generative AI. In a lot of cases, they've been just like, they dump in the information and boom, there it goes. Nobody's writing those anymore. So companies are starting to ask more questions about it. Artificial intelligence have been baked into content technology for a decade or more. And companies have pretty much not used it the way they could have. There are so many route and repetitive parts of a marketing process and things where technology, whether it's artificial intelligence or automation, could make things go so much better or faster. So something like analytics. Absolutely, you should be letting AI just run rampant through your data. to see the trends, to pull out, to identify, you know, oh, maybe this is your next best target audience, something that you or I, no matter how long we spent, we'd never be able to see it. But your technology can do it, you know, literally that quickly. Yet companies are not having at it. Like they're just not using it. I think generative AI has a place, certainly for things where it is route something they need on the fly. It will enable those who aren't as creative as, you know, an agency is to be able to do things maybe a little bit more quickly. But companies are going to have to take the time to set up the parameters, make sure that their branding guidelines are within the tool that they're using, making sure that they've uploaded a lexicon, that all of their brand standards, like their fonts and their colors, etc., are all included in that. That they're not just taking for granted that this generative AI, whatever it produces out, is good to go. It's a great starting point. So somebody I was talking to last week said, you know, it's really helped them for their writing because they're using generative AI to create their outlines, right? And just that's the first step of an outline. I don't know about you. For me, that's one of the hardest parts of writing for me is getting the framework, right? I have all of the ideas. I love word clouds, you know, or not word clouds, but the idea cloud where you start with the topic and then you just start. But you do that. Mine looks, I can't even tell you what it looks like. It looks like a massive storm probably. And trying to distill that and put structure around it can be really difficult. And this person that I was speaking with said, yeah, they're using it and they're testing it out right now. You know, they're still trying to get their hands around it. But they've been really excited about the fact that they go to a chat GPT type tool and say, I want to write an article, create me an article or outline that I want to have, you know, 5 subtopics, whatever, on this topic and put in, and it comes out with like, here's a flow. And they were saying that, you know, they probably, the first time it may have saved them a couple hours. The second time, you know, a couple more hours, but you know, as they've been using it, it's been getting better and better because you get trained to know what to ask from a question perspective, right? So there's a learning curve from our side, but it can be super helpful.
Yeah, I like it for titles and for writing my intros.
Oh, nice.
And I like doing outlines. I can do an outline no problem, but I have really hard trouble getting started, and so I just need that intro, and I'll generate like 5 different versions of it and find pieces of it that I like to tell the right introduction. But yeah, I'm working with trying to figure out how it fits into the processes that I do too. So it's been interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. And not slowing down in any way, shape, or form. We're working on a position paper on it right now. Just on the writing aspect of it, not even like all the visual side of it, just the writing. And it's a lot to digest.
Yeah. All right. I have a question for you, Cathy. Why do you call yourself the chief problem solver and Robert, who is your partner at the Content Advisory, calls himself the chief troublemaker?
Well, there is a correlation. Trouble often causes problems, and then you need someone to solve them, right? No, I'm kidding. So, you know, Robert and I have been working together for over 10 years now. And we have a really good relationship. There is very much a yin and yang from a personality perspective, from where we like to dig in and our strengths and whatnot. So it really is, you know, I couldn't ask for a better gig, quite honestly. And one of the things that, you know, we talk about, and this came out a couple of years, or I guess several years ago, I've lost track of time, 6 or 7 years ago, where somebody asked me what I did. And I said, you know, I went into probably some long diatribe about, oh, well, you know, we work in content strategies. It's like, no. Baseline, boil it down. What do you do? I'm like, I solve problems. And that has been a consistent theme throughout my career. Whether I was in internal communications, when I was coding, you know, as a consultant, as a lead, whatever it is, I solve problems, and that's what I do. So it was a really good job description. I mean, everything I do is to solve a problem, big, small, doesn't matter. It's my goal is to leave somewhere that we've worked better
Yeah.
and with less of a challenge than they had when we walked in. Robert is really good at asking some pretty tough questions, right? So, and sometimes it's troublemaking. Right? So it balances off really well because he'll go in and say, "Yeah, really?" And he'll ask the question and it brings something up and then I solve the problem. Then it's like, but we can address it by this way. And not to say Robert doesn't know how to solve the problem. He
Oh,
totally
I know.
does.
Yeah.
But, it was very complimentary and it wasn't something that he said, okay, I'm going to be, he's been chief troublemaker forever.
Yeah.
But it was only when somebody asked me to really boil down what I did, that I'm like, that's what I do. So
Yeah.
that's my title. And you know what? It's so much more interesting. I get asked, questions about it as opposed to like lead, our lead analyst. I do most of the analyst work for our company. So, lead analyst and chief trouble or problem solver sounds a heck of a lot better than VP of consulting. And by the way, VP, there's two of us. Who am I VP over? Like,
Yeah.
honestly.
You'll have to change your title on LinkedIn then. Okay.
Oh, I thought I had.
Right.
I should go and change that again.
All right. So let's we're going to wrap up here. Just I could ask you tons of questions forever, but I want to talk a little bit about your podcast. And you interview some really strong female voices, and you give them really great titles in your podcast titles too. Like, what made you decide to start one?
So I have been an advocate, a strong advocate, sometimes a quiet one, but of equity for a really, really long time. And having, my career grown up in a very male-dominated world, my first job was with an IT firm in the automotive industry. So I was the first non-nepotism hire and only female in the company. And a lot of like, all I'll say is automotive, and they came out of the pits, right? So we're not talking like senior leadership at Ford. We're talking about, Canadian Tire, oil changing crew. Great guys, but different mindset, right? So completely different. So from very early on in my career, I had to learn how to navigate a very male dominated world, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. I made a lot of missteps on my path. I've also had a really wacky career. I went to school. I was going to go to med school. I changed my major, I think 4 times. Ended coming out with communications and political science with a minor in biology. Did internal comms. I've done SAP. I was an SAP consultant for 5 years. Consulting, technology. I've been all over the place. And so one of the things that I had been talking about for quite a long time was, I can't be the only one. And I can't be the only one who's had these really wacky journeys in life. And I also think back to the time where I wish I had had a female role model to show me that there isn't just one way, right? That I didn't have to worry about doing things differently, or it was okay to try and fail, and I didn't have to try and be a guy, and that there's so many different ways of doing things. So very long way of getting around it was, I'd been talking about it for a while. I'd had this idea, for a while, and then I was sitting in London with Robert and another industry friend, Ian Truscott. And we were talking about, what are we going to do? It was our first trip post COVID, and or during COVID, first trip when travel started happening again. And I'm like, like I said, I got this idea for a podcast, and I like, who's going to listen, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, you need to do this. You absolutely need to do this. So when you articulate, you say it out loud, right? So right there and then I got my URL and I started reaching out to people. And I think one of the things that was sort of had held me back for so long would be like, who's going to want to talk to me? Like, Robert's the big personality, right? Like Robert's the name, and I'm good at what I do. I have no worries that I don't know my stuff and whatever, but whatever. And I have just been so humbled and honored by people, their willingness to share, and the fact that I'm giving people an opportunity to have a platform that they might not have otherwise had. And I've had some really, really great feedback from people who have listened and just saying, you know what, thank you so much for doing this. It's so great to hear the variety and the challenges and the different points of view and the perspective. And I mean, I'm on episode 40, I think, or 41 this week, and they've all been different. I've literally learned something new every single conversation.
Yeah, I've listened to, I was listening to Carla Johnson today, actually,
Okay.
because I love her. I have one of her book. I loved listening to her, but I'm just impressed with the people that you have on it, like that from my industry that I knew of, like, Christina Halverson, Melanie Diesel, and all of those people. It was really, really interesting to listen to them.
Yeah, it's been amazing, the number of women that have either started their own thing or have taken like a sharp right turn, right? Like they've started somewhere, and then one of the questions that I ask is there something that happened? Was there an inflection point in your career? And I would say the majority of people that I speak with, there's been something. There's been an aha moment where it's been like, this is what I need to do, or this is where I need to go, or this is either maybe confirming the path that they're on, or nope, I need a change.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting.
Yeah. Uncharted Journeys. I have you on Spotify, but you're everywhere else too. So I would encourage people to get that podcast and listen to some of the conversations. So thank you, Cathy. This was a really great thing. I appreciate your coming on and sharing your insights on content operations.
Well, thank you. Great. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah. And huge shout out and a thank you to Ingenix, who is the sponsor of the Content Matters podcast. They provide headless content experiences, customer portals, and content management software. Their mission, I guess you would say, is to help companies unify product and marketing content and enable them to deliver it on any channel, on any device. Definitely check them out at ingenix.com. And thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Barb. Bye, everyone.